All right. Go ahead, Courtney.
Hello, thank you for joining us. This is our Revolution Washington Bernie-Cratz Coalition vetting interview of Marty Campbell, who is running for Pierce County Council District 5. Once we get beyond 3 words in the title, there's no promises. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Thank you for joining us today, Marty.
Thank you for having me.
And you have been on the Tacoma City Council.
Correct.
8 years?
Correct. Just finished up 8 years on Tacoma City Council, representing the east side and south end of Tacoma.
Excellent. So we usually use this interview to ask questions that of answers from your questionnaire, but you didn't get to your questionnaire?
I didn't get a chance to, I got overwhelmed on that this weekend with all the election activities and stuff in the community. And all of a sudden I was like, this morning I woke up, I was like, oh, panic attack. And I was just like, well, so thank you for meeting with me and just talking through it. Absent that, and then I will try to get some of that plugged in.
Well, we do like to, we're not sure, we've never had this situation. So we're not sure how it will impact the overall endorsement process, because I checked with some party people. I wanted to get a broader frame of reference, and Dem party people had said we would not have been impressed. Basically, loosely, we'll just say it that way. But I do want to still, I feel like some public informing the electorate is still important. And then I've got a lot of, what is it, the phrase when you, to be upfront with, I want to make, your opponent also didn't fill out the questionnaire, but hers was a technical difficulty. She had been doing it and it crashed. And then she has disability that affected her. And then our technology was not compatible with her aids. So, but we did go and extended. So, and she reached out in timely fashion. So I wanted to be upfront that she had also issue, but in a technical form. And then we've known each other for 20-ish years. I don't know.
That, yes.
Yeah, the numbers are easy for me to keep track, because the year I was 20 when I started interacting with your business.
so that makes it pretty easy. Yes.
Yes. So we have a history for being forthright here, and so at least for the ability to share with our community where you stand on many issues, we're going to proceed at least for a little while.
Okay.
So one of our main questions is anti-corruption. Rhonda, did you want to take this?
Sure.
Okay.
So I am a member of Represent Us, which is a national organization that works on the American Anti-Corruption Act. And it works on transparency, accountability, election reform, and all that good stuff. Ranked choice voting is one of the things on its platform. So one question, I guess, to you is, how do you know what ranked choice voting is? Which I know Tacoma does, but I'll let you. And how do you feel about ranked choice voting?
Well, and I would submit, based upon how it happened last time, just because we had it doesn't mean everyone knew it or understood. I actually understood it, really looked into it when it first came out, because there was a lot of question of what's going to be what this is. I have a background in math, love mathematics. And so for me, ranked choice voting was just fascinating. I love and I could mathematically see how things should fall through, how people should be, well, here's my first choice. And it gave you the opportunity to support a, maybe not as popular candidate, but without risking losing a seat to someone who you really didn't want in there. Because a lot of times in elections, you've got hey, I love this person, I like this person. Oh, heck no. And so you end up taking the I like because you don't want the oh, heck no. And this is supposed to address that. I think it works really well in very long ballots where there's a lot of candidates. We did have a history here in the Tacoma area. We had a flawed result that is many times you know, that is blamed on ranked choice voting. I do think a traditional primary probably would have given us a different result, because it would allowed everyone, it was a 6-way race, and it would allowed everyone to focus around the person who was the oh heck no, who ended up getting endorsed or elected, and then ended up costing the county millions of dollars in lawsuits, because everyone pretty much knew that's what would happen. But there wasn't a chance to ever, because when we had 6 people, we're talking about, well, this person, and it just didn't allow us to actually have a very binary. That long way of saying I would like to see us give it a try again, but education. Maybe we started on some smaller races and just let people get used to it, build to it. And I think Australia's had a lot of great success with it, as has other countries. Use it on a smaller level and then work it up from there.
Excellent. Thank you. No, it's great. Gives some history, you know, because not everybody knows that it has, you know, been tried and what happened in Tacoma. So thank you for that. Another piece that I really like is looking at publicly financed elections. So where there's this, you know, how do you feel about like a true start and stop date with a certain amount of money given that, you know, kind of keeps away some of the outside influence? So truly publicly financed, this is what you get, go. How do you feel about a system like that?
Oh, God bless you. That'd be wonderful. Actually, when I was on city council, myself and Councilmember Bo, when we were doing charter revisions, drafted an amendment to give it a test run in Tacoma, but we weren't able to get enough votes to get it off the dais to get it out to the voters to consider putting it in place. That being said, it was a concept. We didn't have a really solid funding mechanism behind it. But we, you know, the trick is what's going to be the funding mechanism. But I think if you're able to pretty easily solve that side, I think that there's definitely a will, again, particularly in smaller jurisdictions, and even the smaller, the better, small towns and things like that can really benefit from publicly financed campaigns. And would be supportive, and you know, like I said, tried to push it forward before, wasn't able to get there, but would be happy to try to continue to push forward on that.
Excellent, thank you. And then something I ask everybody we talk to: how is your campaign being financed? So how are you fundraising? Who's paying into your campaign? How's that going?
Well, everybody. You know, it is under the current rules, which is not publicly financed campaigns. My biggest contributor, my mom and dad are my biggest contributors. But I've just gotten a really broad base from small business owners, local organizations, friends and neighbors, up and down, literally on my street, and people who have worked in with politics in a long time, which is really strong to me, because we actually have a history in Tacoma that if a candidate is not doing a good job, that a lot of, you know, elected officials don't always line up behind them. And we saw that in the city council race. We're seeing that right now in a legislative race, where other elected officials will say, no, that's not someone we can work with. What I am seeing, you know, through much of my support, is everyone says, look, we aren't always going to agree with Marty. We know this, but we can work with him. He's respectful, and he's someone who brings earnest and passion to the job, and will do a good job. And so from that, I have a very broad base. If you had a chance, you probably look through my PDC. It's from all over the board, from organizations on all sides, and union support. And we're, you know, proud of what we got going there.
Excellent. So transparency is really key to a lot of people these days. Do you have any ideas on how we can be more transparent? You know, especially at, you know, the local level on up.
I think we need to continue to work on our sunshine laws, and making sure that people have access to the files that are created, and the records and that are created. You know, having been an elected official, I understand what it's like to get public disclosure requests for information all the time, for meeting minutes. But we need to make sure that, you know, our city council meetings were at night, but the county council said, oh, we can't meet at night. Well, yes, we can. And I think we need to be meeting on nights and out in the district more, particularly when you're covering something as large as Pierce County. I think we need to be having more meetings that are out where people live, to have an opportunity for them to give that feedback loop into us. But most of all, just make sure that we requests that come in or information that people want to know, that we're prompt and forthright. If you have to continuously answer a series of questions, that means you didn't communicate it right in the first place. Make sure you have a good, strong communication team that's just putting all the information up there. We've got websites. You can put as much information as you have out there to the public. Let them decide what's relevant to them. But don't overwhelm them with so much that you hide. You know, there's that balance of, oh, okay, here's 10,000 pages. Well, the document you needed was on page 1,313, you know, so it needs to be that balance of effective information, but complete information.
Thank you very much. My segment on anti-corruption is done. So I'm going to pass it over to Courtney next. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Usually we ask a series of, it's a list of questions here. But
Okay.
with the questionnaire, I want to get to some of the stuff that's on the questionnaire. Washington, and some of this is not county level, but it's about getting to know you. And
Okay.
also, anytime someone's elected, there's a good chance that, as you are now, you went from city council, you're pursuing county. I don't want to project, but maybe at some point, you will have words to say, you know, a place of decision making in these topics. So,
although the politics of Olympia are not something that appeal to me as much, because I'm very much about how do we fix issues in our neighborhoods. But I'm happy to discuss these because sometimes decisions out of Olympia or the federal government affect our neighborhoods. And then we're busy solving issues in our neighborhood that were really created in the other Washington.
Absolutely. And so taxes, they do impact us. And even though they're usually on a state level, because I'm asking about our regressive tax system, I think it's pretty understood that Washington, as studies show, has the most regressive tax system.
Yes.
But it does still make people scared of what is usually offered as the alternative, a state income tax. Do you have alternate solutions, or where do you stand on our tax system?
Well, and you're correct. It is very regressive, and most of the opportunity that they give us locally is through, well, you can expand your sales tax. You can expand your sales tax, which is regressive and becoming very impactful to the daily lives. I think we absolutely need to be having a discussion at a state level about a fair income tax, about what we're looking at as far as how can we spread this out, because we can't continue to go to sales tax. We can't continue to go to property tax as our main sources of revenue. We've already capped the property tax revenue from coming in. So absent that, you start getting other ideas that come forth that are much more disparate in their impact or much more regressive. And so I think that we need to sit down and have a serious conversation. It may include replacing the state portion of the state sales tax with an income tax, therefore creating a little more balance. That being said, there will still be a sales tax because locally, the majority of our taxes are collected there. Locally, the majority of our property taxes go to our schools, not our cities. So it's actually school and state on most of that. So I think if we just look at the whole pie and then just look at how do we build it better so it's more sustainable and less regressive, I'm absolutely open to any conversations along that line. I've also heard that we need to be looking at some years ago, there were some changes on the capital gains tax that may need to be looked at, that perhaps the change wasn't the best way to go. But I really don't know all the details on that, but if I was working on a committee that was helping on that, I would definitely be fully informed.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm curious, we have at least I think in the unincorporated Pierce County, there's been a ban on safe injection sites. And I myself live in not in your district, but in an area where there's just homelessness and drug addiction everywhere. So I have it too. I also live in an area where I feel like there is space in our community for a safe injection site, because I'm abutting a business district and an industrial zone. And so I feel like it doesn't have to be residential. It can be on an edge of a residential, but it can be an edge of an industrial area. It can not threaten children in their yards, kind of thing. Do you feel like there's space in your district for something like that, or space in the Tacoma area? Because, population density, we just would have the people who need the service. Or do you feel like that's just not something you feel Tacoma can offer?
I think if it's something that we decide we want to offer, we can find the space for it, be it Tacoma or Pierce County. But there needs to be a lot more conversation and understanding about what it is and what it is not, how it would and wouldn't work. Many years ago, there was a lot of pushback about the needle exchange that we started. And that actually is passed out, not just a few blocks from my house. And the needle exchange program, very controversial when it started, pushed around through a lot of different neighborhoods before pretty much landing in the parking lot of the health department. But now is being held up as a national model that has absolutely drove down HIV rates, has drove down hepatitis rates, and has been a lifesaver at many points. We has also run the methadone clinic here locally. Again, more harm reduction. So what we're talking about is how do we engage in harm reduction from those who are right now in a crisis situation with their addiction, that they can safely can consume that. I think there's space, but there's so much conversation that needs to go on before identifying a space is the last thing you do. You have to be able to get the community will behind it. We've already had a county council that's pretty much put the lockdown on that, and so unfortunately we left it to the cities to lead on that. Tacoma has been a leader. They've been a leader on many things when it comes to like youth homeless crisis housing. We're working on building one of those currently in the 4th district. That would be both the drop-in center, but then transitional housing where they can get those wraparound services at about 38th and Portland. So it's an area that we could have a lot of impact. So I don't know if I have a direct yay nay answer where it would go, because I don't know if we're at that point in the conversation.
So, but as a voice on the council, would you be pushing to, because, well, one, I understand unincorporated Pierce counties, like I want to avoid being the recipient of everybody else's, problems. Mm-hmm. And so that really does make me question, it makes me look at myself. Am I a NIMBY on this subject? Like, oh, it's a great idea, but not here. So I do want to protect the unincorporated, sparsely populated areas from being inundated with a problem that comes from the urban center. But how would you best use your voice on the, like, do you support it, safe injection sites? And then would you, I guess, fight to find that balance, promote them for use within our county, but also balancing the respect for the more rural areas of the county? It's a hard question. It's hard to develop this question. I'm sorry.
And that's where I go back to, we need more education and conversation as communities so that we're all talking from the same points, because we look at it through all these different lenses. I mean, even you just said, well, the county shouldn't be impacted by something that's happening in the urban core. Well, I'm going to disagree with you. The opioid epidemic is hitting every single neighborhood across this county. It does not, it's in our richest neighborhoods. It's in our ruralest neighborhoods. It's even worse in some of our most rural neighborhoods or communities across this state. Where it manifests itself and where you see it happening on the street are in the poorer communities, because that's where it's if someone's in a wealthier community, they may have that opioid addiction, but they're able to fund it. It's where people run into that crisis of not being able to fund it, not having a place to live, and all of a sudden they're ending up on the street. And now people are going, oh, look, the opioid crisis exists here. It's everywhere. And that's why the conversation needs to be everywhere. But I think we've got a long ways to go before we can get to deciding and what we're looking at. the models we have to look at are in Canada. As far as I understand, we really don't even have and I have to do a little more research, but what is considered a working model in the United States, where we've been able to get that. So I'm all in on the conversation to get us to where we need to be as a community. And that may be putting it in, that may be saying, you know what, we're not going to get there, but we're going to get there with methadone distributed throughout many places, making sure that Suboxone is out there, that all the first responders and primary places have I want to say Narcan, but I might be saying that one a little bit wrong. Safe injection is only a small part of the entire opioid epidemic that we need to be attacking in every neighborhood, and with multiple ways. And so it needs to be part of that conversation. It's clearly something that's going to need a lot more conversation before we get to a community consensus on it, because even people like you and I who talk about this a lot don't even have all the words yet on what it would and what it is not.
And Brian, you had something?
I wanted to point out that part of that conversation should be the pharmaceutical companies and doctors and all of the prescription drugs that are just handed out like candy. And then when people get addicted to these substances and they don't have any resources to be able to afford the insurance to get these medications, they become addicted on the opioids. And this also needs to be part of the conversation too. So
And in Tacoma, Pierce County, it is. Tacoma was very early on when I was still on city council. We launched a lawsuit against Purdue and many of the large pharmaceuticals to go after them financially to help fund programs in our community to undo the damage that they've done. Since then, Pierce County has joined in on the conversation. I think what we're going to see is a larger realignment of many of them coming together. And much like the big tobacco settlements, we will see funding coming back to help undo some of that. And so I think it's great to have that conversation now so that we have a plan in place. So because there's no way I've seen they're going to lose this case. It's clear what they did, and there's going to be funding coming from that. If I want to be ahead of other communities, have that plan in place on how we're going to address the opioid epidemic. The first thing we shouldn't be funding is what's an opioid epidemic. It should be, these are the 7 tactical things we're putting in place.
And would you support Medicare for all and the I-1600 effort to be able to combat such things as you're talking about as part of the solution?
I think Medicaid for all and many of the key elements of I-1600 completely fall in with that. We're talking about a comprehensive system that is, in this case, we're just talking about opioid, but it's about the whole continuum of care from top to bottom. And opioids are part of it, where they may have ended up there because they didn't get the continuum of care they needed over here. And we could have avoided so much down the road costs and problems that we're having now with the proper care at the beginning.
Thank you for all the work on that front.
Happy to be there.
And then can you talk to us about living wage? Where do you stand on living wage?
Well, we're not close to reaching what we need to here in Pierce County, probably well over $20 a person per hour. When I had my small businesses, and I go back to what I did is, at that time I paid $1 an hour over minimum wage because I wanted to hire the best. I offered medical care. I offered leave for my employees because I felt, I wanted my employees to be able to show up and that their biggest worry be about what the customer's concern is and not about what they have going on in their daily lives. That needs to be easy. They need to be able to have be able to afford a place to live. They need to be able to get there. That's what I did. While on the city council, we were able to actually put to the ballot a couple measures to increase the minimum wage, and currently in Tacoma, it's still above the state level. I think some of that's going to finally be coming into alignment, but we need to continue to push up both the minimum, but then making sure that we are working in with our employers to make sure that we're creating those living wage jobs too, that we have those in our communities. The living wage jobs shouldn't be an hour, 90 minutes away on the freeway. They need to be right here where we're at in the 5th district of the county council. We have lots of opportunity, a lot of vacant storefronts that we could use to really put some of those jobs right here in our community. Because when you can walk down the street to your job, the definition of a living wage is a little different than if you have to pay for transportation and 2 to 3 hours of commute time each day. it's mathematically, it's still, the same level. But when you start adding up what your expenses are in your life, and you now can be a family that is a 1-car family rather than a 2-car family because someone works right there in the neighborhood, that is a very different concept. And that's just one way. I mean, overall, we've seen wages remain flat over the last couple decades, and that's what needs to change. Is we need to have wages outpacing inflation, not trying to play catch up to inflation.
So I do remember having it on a ballot. There was a Fight for 15 movement in Tacoma, and I think what landed on a ballot was a graduated to 12 and change, or just a jump to 12. But where did you stand on the discussion between 15 and there were 3 options really. The goal was 15 by the group, and
so there were 3 options, and so what we got were signatures were gathered for a 15 now right away instant implementation, and that brought it to the dais. And some of the as I read at that time, the polling put it at about a 45% chance of passing. And the mayor at the time led on an effort that brought forward the graduated to get it to 12 over, I think it was 3 years. It set something that wasn't as high, but it doesn't stop it from getting to 15 graduating over time, because at this point the council, all they have to do is renew it. What it did when it sent it to the ballot, it gave voters 3 choices: not increase it to 12, or increase it to the 15. But it changed the conversation from, do we increase the minimum wage or not? Yes, no, which would have brought in literally probably millions in independent expenditures from across the nation to try to stop it from even getting a foothold here in Tacoma, to, we're raising the minimum wage. Do you want 12 or 15? Which then forced the business community to pretty much stand out or to get behind a lesser amount. And at that point, and the Chamber of Commerce got behind the 12, that was a historically record high for any Chamber of Commerce anywhere to ever back a minimum wage. We're on record at backing a minimum wage that was $5 over the national wage. I think we didn't do a good job of selling that story, because what we should have been doing was pushing then that story that businesses in Tacoma pushed a $12 minimum wage nationally, and then use that to leverage it to double it down and come back later with increases. But there was the strategic long term were set up for better increases long term than to every 5 years trying to go with the shock jump and then constantly making the conversation about shouldn't we. It's how much.
Okay. So incrementalism has its place, I suppose. And then something in your description, I am local in Tacoma, not in your district. And so I feel like some of Tacoma's last decade, maybe, I feel like we're pushing some issues down the road because of our fear for fights, or we're contemplating stuff for fear of fights. Like we're contemplating selling Click, where we don't want to fight billboards because of the fight. I'm not. What are the issues that you're willing to fight?
So, well, one was I was the leading advocate on billboards when we put that in place, and was the one who kept pushing the hardest to get that settled, or my goal was none. I didn't have all that support there, but if you go back and look, you'll see I was the champion on really, I'd love a clear skies, and I'd also love to get all of our power lines undergrounded too. But that's the utopian farm boy in me that grew up with nothing bothering my skies. So it's, I mean, I think it sometimes it feels like because we didn't get the 100% that we're not fighting, but we were one of the only cities in the nation standing up to the billboard companies. we fought to keep it. The utility wanted to spin click off. They brought us a plan. Here's how you sell it off. We fought to keep it, and we're continuing to fight. When there was a Walmart looking at coming in, we fought to keep that. We tried to raise a discussion to see if that was the right place. That ended up costing, because of what the happened while I was on city council, and what we did cost the city of Tacoma $2 million in a lawsuit. And at the end of the day, the Walmart not only got built, it opened on date, on time, on budget. We didn't even get a speed bump in front of it. And the lawsuit we got hit with was still $2 million. Had we stopped it, probably would have cost us $2 billion. Literally, we would have had to pay out as a city. We would have been paying Walmart for decades. And so we need to make sure that we're fighting, but that we're fighting smart. And that we are, because we have had success. We had success in my district against human trafficking, and against the work I did standing up to restrict hours of massage parlors and get human trafficking out. We've had success on addressing lots of issues. We're continuing to push on fair share. We're continuing to push on many areas. So I think we see us fighting. We don't always get the result that we want, but I would say Tacoma has waded into more fights on more of these issues. I mean, what other city, even in Pierce County, is discussing minimum wage or billboards, or even willing to host a conversation about self-injection sites, or hosting a methadone clinic or a needle exchange? None of these others are even willing to begin the conversation. We're willing to have the conversation. I'm willing to step in there and not only host a conversation, but lead sometimes the unpopular point of view of fighting, but making sure that we're all seeing all the issues and then pushing as far as we can on them. But it's frustrating because we don't always get the outcome we want. But I think if you compare us to any of the other surrounding cities in Pierce County, we fought a heck of a lot. Sorry, soapbox there a little bit.
Well, I just like that I triggered you into singing the praises of Tacoma spiel, because I feel like I'm always doing defense for Tacoma. So
I had to agree there. As a Tacoma native, I was born in St. Joe's, man. I feel you. Yeah. You got that pride.
We're always that second city. When there's always that little. I was a little brother growing up, so we're always able to push the issue a little bit. But we've had some success with our fights too.
Okay, and then your district doesn't reach the Port of Tacoma, but your district does encompass much of the tribal land of the Puyallup tribe, and it abuts the port. And so I'm guessing some of your constituents are in the blast zone. Where have you stood? Where do you stand? What are you going to take to the county council on this issue?
Well, you covered about 3 issues in there, but
you're welcome.
So I will, the Port of Tacoma is always going to be an interesting one. And I think that we need to get, that's an independently elected body, and its elections need to be, and its board needs to be held up to the same scrutiny that we hold the city and county councils up to. They have the same voting district as the county executive, but most people couldn't name one county or one Port of Tacoma commissioner. And it really is the Port of Pierce County, because that's the voting district, that's the taxing district that it comes from. Then that's the economy that they're impacting when they're making decisions down there. And so we need to make sure that we're holding them accountable, and that we're, I think the biggest problem we have right now is we don't have a unified vision for what the port is. Is it a manufacturing center? Is it an import-export center? Is it, what is it? What are its chief industries, and what's it going to be used for? And I think that's important, because when you start looking at, I go back to the methanol debate, when all of a sudden we were looking at making it a manufacturing place for methanol, that didn't make any sense to me, because where they were going to propose it was going to be right on the end of the freeway extension that we spent 10 years lobbying to get to come in, to plug in, so we could move more freight and freight mobility. And then at the bottom of where it came into the port, they were going to put something that had no need for freight. And it seems to me that if you're going to for 10 years make your primary focus connecting 167 in so you have freight mobility, then where 167 comes in, you should be putting in products that need freight to move. And that's part of the reason why I didn't think that was a good fit for down there. With LNG, watching that come forward over the last decade has been interesting, because where it first kind of hit on my radar was from the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, where we're looking at the 2.5 PMI, the particulates, and Tacoma was out of attainment. We weren't reaching it, and chief in that was wood smoke. So we've gone after wood smoke, but then car emissions, but right behind that was diesel emissions, particularly on the ships that were in the port. Now, we've done a couple of things that aren't talked about, which was providing shore power, so that when these ships are docked, they can turn off those engines and plug in and run on electric while they're parked in port. We've put a similar thing in place for semis that are queuing up to wait. They're creating queuing zones where they can hook into power so they can turn off all their trucks so they're not idling down there. So we've had this big arc of, well, how do we get off diesel? And so many years ago, we started on the arc of, well, we need more fuel efficient things. And I think that the idea of converting ships over to being LNG starts off in the right direction, because, if you talk to the people who breathe the air down there, if you look at the air studies, we need to do something about the air down there. What I don't think was complicated or contemplated in the arc to switching some of the ships over to cleaner burning fuels was that we would put a larger processing center within the port of Tacoma. So I think if it was just simply a fueling terminal that was then converting ships over to more clean and efficient fuel, I think it'd be much more accepted. I'm concerned about some of the safety issues that we hear being raised. Is this more storage than we should be having for something that is needed for the ship's use? Is it more than what the ships will be using? And I don't see why we shouldn't be looking at more of an on-time delivery. Today we need 10,000 gallons, and so we're storing 10,000, or 100,000 gallons, so we're storing 100,000, and bringing it in only at a level that at which it's being consumed. I'm not sure I'm fully on board with the peak shaving idea, which I think puts a larger storage footprint down there, which is where we hear most of the concerns being raised from. We need to make sure that we're first of all being safe, that it's being done right, that every permit is getting filled out. I applaud the Clean Air Agency and their work in bringing along the supplemental impact analysis, because I think, but again, I find it interesting that comes back around full circle, that much of the work that got us where we're at came from them. But I think Ken up there, he's doing a great job, and I think he's really doing the best he can. He's really listening to people. And so I look at that. I would encourage them to reach out with our local health department. I used to serve on the Board of Health, and complete a voluntary health impact analysis. If this is as benign as they say, prove it. Put it on paper. Put it on a health impact analysis. It's something we've done a couple of in the state. It's not mandatory at this time, but I think it could help them really make a case for or against. It'll lay down the facts of health impacts. And if that gives us all, again, that better chance of information to look at where we're at. Probably not. Because it's a 10-year issue. I mean, and that's part of our political problem these days, is that, and we see this, we're turning entire national policy on tweet issues. Yeah. That really are so much more complex. If it's good
for the president, it's good for you, Marty Campbell.
Right.
So in relationship, because you'll be representing much of the tribal, I don't know if all the members, it would be presumptuous to say where that the bulk of the tribe is living on that land, but you'll be representing the constituents that reside on their official reservation land.
Right.
Where are you on the aspect of LNG where the tribe is concerned, be it property or environmental impact? Well, you've gone into environmental impact, but where this.
Let me talk about tribal relations and such. And I've had what I would consider a great relationship with the Puyallup tribe in the time that I was on, even before I was on city council, the time I've been on city council. I'd regularly sit down with council member Beam and David Beam and meet with Sylvia Miller. We worked on some social issues. I'm going to get off on a little bit of a tangent here and then bring it back. I mean, some of the things that I think you'll see coming forth over the next few years are some stuff that I was able to lay groundwork on is in recognizing a local Indigenous Peoples Day on or about October 12th. We actually, did you know that there is actually a Columbia Street in the city of Tacoma? Not Columbus, but Columbia Street. It exists only on a small portion of the east side across the reservation lands. So we're working on getting that renamed. And I've also asked that we look at all the street signs in the lower Portland Avenue and having them dual language with Twi'lechutzi, the local Sahelish dialect on the signs. And so it'd be Portland, and then it would be the Twi'lechutzi language below it, because it's not enough just to teach them the language, but when they can see, when the youth can see it in everyday use, then that's where they can begin to value that. And so culturally, I have a great relationship. They recently have supported my campaign, the Puyallup tribe, and Councilmember Runyon endorsed my campaign because of my ability to work with them. I served on their 2% committee that helped allocate their funds to the local governments and do that. So I've been working closely with them. As far as, I absolutely support they filed the lawsuit. They, I think, got some really good things in place because there's some legal issues. I have to be a little bit careful because there's some legal things that I know that I can't disclose because I've learned them in executive sessions. But I think that they're probably on a good tack. It definitely was representing their interests, and I will always support the local tribe, particularly the Puyallup tribe, but any local tribe, to assert their sovereign authority and to be engaged in every conversation. We talked about, you say, where does this end up? Well, we look at the sub-area plan we brought forward while I was on city council. I was the one who made the motion to make sure the Puyallup tribe was involved in that, which I still have friends over at the port who are not very happy with me about that. But I think it's important that they be there and be part of that conversation. I always think more people at the table is always better towards the outcome because they've been managing this land for eons, and they deserve to be part of the conversation as we move forward. And I think that their rights need to be heard as part of that. And I think that the sub-area plan is what's going to set that vision and make sure we're all on the same page with what we want and don't want.
Yes, and so a little. You mentioned earlier the environmental impact locally of LNG would clean up the air a little bit here. But when we look at the whole system, and you're from the Midwest, Nebraska, yep. And when I went to visit family in North Dakota, I took the opportunity to drive on down to Nebraska, and let me tell you, it was beautiful. And so my family in North Dakota, they're a couple hours away from where the bulk of the fracking is going in. So they see the economic boom because they're far enough not away to be away from the toxicity for now, because their groundwater is getting toxic. But they're close enough for people to spend the weekends, renting a room from them, kind of thing. But there's toxicity and human trafficking happening, especially with tribal women in those areas. So there's a social impact, there's an environmental impact, and the leaking in the pipelines because no pipeline is completely sealed, and all the natural happenings that can happen along the pipeline, but bringing it back to home with the pipelines here, or not just the pipeline here, but where they're putting that LNG plant is on land that will liquefy in an earthquake. And in an earthquake, we then have the reality of a high risk of tsunami. And so it's at like 0 feet above sea level. So tsunami's a risk. But we also have a mountain that is due to erupt, and the Lahar flow, while not guaranteed, is common to come down the Puyallup River Valley, which the port is the estuary of the Puyallup River Valley, Puyallup River. So do you ever talk about location when discussing LNG?
Well, and I don't get to pick where it goes, but I one time asked former city managers, what scares you most? And he said, a major event that would cause the northeast Tacoma to slip into the bay. Major landslide, mostly because that then would displace Commencement Bay over downtown. So not only would you lose northeast Tacoma, you'd lose downtown. Now, how do you prepare for that? Well, I mean, the only way you could prepare for that would be to abandon those lands. I mean, it's you can't. There are some things that you can't. I'm not equating to that. It's just so yeah. I mean, I think when I go back to safety is the most important thing. All those elements need to be weighed in. You know, fracking is a terrible, terrible thing. Look at the earthquakes it's causing in Oklahoma. I think it was Ireland that just recently did a full ban on fracking in their country, and I think it was. Just because something's innovative doesn't mean it's the best thing. And we found this time and time again where something came out innovative, asbestos, that looked like a great thing at the time. And then long term, you find out it's absolutely not the right course. We need to be getting on a course of off of fossil fuels. We need to be working away from them, not towards, oh, well, this fossil fuel's a little better. I mean, there are the graduated steps to cleaner and cleaner, but we do need to be looking at that life cycle impact. I think we have a lot more opportunity in solar moving forward. When I was on council, I proposed elements that would make it more affordable for low-income people to put solar on their house so that we can begin more and more of those transitions so you don't even need LNG to heat your house. And so that, do I have an answer? No, this is a huge issue. A lot of people are working on it from a lot of different areas. And I served on a council with, really smart people like Ryan Mello who know this stuff inside and out. And, I've learned more through osmosis just sitting beside him than most people have access to. But I would really look to people like him on leadership, or Ken Kenworthy, or some of these others who, spend their day learning these issues inside and out. And generally being supportive of many of those directions, as I was with some of the sub-area planning as we were coming forward.
Thank you. So then we'll go to we'll leave the LNG for now because that is an ongoing, forever topic.
And it's going to be, but the point is we have to keep it front of topic.
Yes.
You need to have the conversation. We can't shy away from. You say we shy away from conversation. I don't know about that's true in Tacoma. We engage a lot more, and I think we're a healthier city for it.
So did the proposal to this is off the cuff, the proposal to end the public forum in the city council meeting, were you still on the city council at that time, or was that after your tenure?
No, I was still there, and it wasn't as much to end it is it wasn't we were having conversation, but we weren't hearing each other. And it was often, I think some of that frustration came from, we'd hear 3 hours of testimony and then we'd respond to an empty room. Because after 3 hours, everyone had said what they wanted to say, they left and they didn't actually, weren't listening to what we were responding to. But our rules didn't allow us to respond in time. Which is something now the new council has started to adopt, where they're being more conversational and bringing data and information forward at the point of an issue being raised, rather than 2 hours later to an empty room. Then people come back, you still haven't done anything. And we're like, did you listen to the last meeting? We talked about this, but we're telling it again to an empty room. And so people were coming a couple months in a row asking for an answer, but the answer was coming forth at a time when they weren't still in the room, or was being released at a later time. And what we had was not as effective as it used to be. What I think that the process that we put in place, working with the Center for Dispute Resolution, Mayor Elise over there, is a wonderful person. I think has brought forward some good efforts. That if you watch the last couple citizens forums, there's been a lot more conversation, and I've heard a lot more people heralding what the comments of the city council members afterwards, because they were bringing that into the conversation that allows the next conversation to be an advancement, not a repeat. And so I think that to that end, those goals are being reached. What I would love to see us do at County Council, which I appreciate, is they take public comment at every meeting, but it's at 3 p.m. If we really want effective income or input, we need to be moving that to a time when people can get there and out into the neighborhoods.
Excellent. Thank you. And then I have some connection to CD 10, and one of the things that is being brought to attention in CD 10 is the vote by the current the incumbent has voted to support NSA domestic spying on United States citizens. So, and in discussing that, we realized that Tacoma also has a stingray problem, which is domestic surveillance of Tacoma citizens. And if I'm recalling correctly, a newspaper article stated that at the time it passed with full unanimous city council support. And I believe that was during your tenure. Can you confirm that? And then can you explain how that vote came to be and the consequences, maybe? Any hindsight?
Some. So this was many years ago. And when, I think it was originally just came to us as a purchase resolution to, hey, we're purchasing this piece of technology that's going to help us track down people who have warrants. I mean, I would, at the time, one of my council raised, when we saw the briefing on it, part of it was to, hey, we've got someone for an active warrant. They get a warrant. Because before they can turn the stingray on, they have to have a warrant from a judge to be able to go after the target that they're going after. Those were, some of the base questions, but there wasn't the bigger conversation about what stingray was. Fast forward a couple of years, and the newspaper's doing an article on it. You can go back and look up these articles, and they come out, and there are a couple of colleagues of mine who are like, "What? Stingray? We knew nothing about this." And I was on vacation out of state, and I read that article. I called up the news review and I said, that's not true. We were briefed on it. I don't know if we knew fully what it did, but to say that we didn't know that we were doing it, I felt was disingenuous. And you'll see if you go back and read, I was the first councilman to come forward and be like, no, we voted on this. If there's an issue, let's discuss it. We took the best information we had at the time and moved it forward, but we can't now sit there and pretend like we didn't, because we did. And so you'll go back and see that I took responsibility for at least that we knew we were putting in this technology that needed a warrant to be invoked. What we asked for at that time was more information on how it was being used, where it's being used, when it's been used, and they confirmed that they still had received a warrant every time they used it, and it needs to continue to make sure that it has a police warrant in place. It is, I think, another one of those things where the community could use a lot more conversation around. The one that Tacoma has is a mobile one, there's been talk of in Seattle, I think, putting fixed ones in, and that I think would be wholly inappropriate. But a mobile one where they're trying to work with a judge, but it needs to make sure it has the full legal oversight in place before anything like that is used. As I understand it now, pretty much that technology is no longer actually working because the new cell phones won't connect to it and things like that. So it's actually becoming a quickly outdated technology. I read somewhere, but you'll see back then I didn't try to shy away from taking responsibility. If we made a mistake, we made a mistake. We need to get out there, admit our responsibility, and have that conversation. Now, there was a lawsuit that was filed, and some people say, well, look, you lost a lawsuit. Well, the lawsuit was a very different thing at the time, because when if you kind of read back through it, just to explain it, the newspaper had had put in a public disclosure request. The partners we had on it said, oh, you can't disclose that, it's confidential. So we didn't. And then later when reviewed, it's like, no, we should have disclosed it. We actually would have been open to disclosing the information. We were okay with it. Our partners advised us not to. We got bad advice on that. I'd have been okay with us disclosing all of it. It all got disclosed in the end anyways. And I think we make a better decision if we were all disclosing the information.
So more transparency, which we already touched on earlier.
I just want to break through real quick and let you guys know we're about at an hour. So I don't know if you have a time crunch or not, but just want to get that in there.
My apologies. I'm waiting.
Oh no, we're go. Oh no, we're good. We go. So it's, I just want to make sure that we're not. Do you have anything pressing? And then I want to make sure Courtney gets in some questions and stuff to make sure that we're hitting things hard.
Yeah, and we checked in with Facebook. You're not being harassed there yet, so congratulations. And then, how the Stingray issue with the police department is somewhat related to the militarization of police departments. As a county council member, like, I don't know if county departments, I'm in the city, so I focus on my problems more, and I'm trying to look outside, but I haven't looked at our county. Are they also being militarized? Where do you stand on that? Would you support community policing? And
absolutely, community policing has worked immensely across I was just meeting with our CLO here locally this weekend. But community policing is something we put in place in the city of Tacoma. They're starting to put it in place in Pierce County. I think they could do a lot better job of putting it out there so that we have community liaison officers and deputy sheriffs that are going and working within the local communities and associations and helping people, because it's a very effective way to empower neighbors into building community and taking their issues back. As far as, we want to make sure that the police have the tools they need to do their job, but we need to make sure that we're having a good look at what those tools are, because there are some tools that I think the most effective tool you can give an officer is training. You can make sure that they're trained in compassionate techniques, that they're trained in de-escalation. Training and education are the tools we should be making sure they have the most of. But we should never have them in a situation where their life or the life of those who we're trying to protect are at a great disadvantage. So we want to make sure they have the tools, but we want to make sure that they have all the education and training to make sure they never have to use those tools. So I'm a big fan of Sun Tzu's Art of War. If you've ever read that.
I'm familiar.
I have a great translation that has many leaders throughout the year of Chinese history of years giving their interpretations. But the primary goal of the Art of War is to never go to war. De-escalation, make sure, try everything you can before, make sure you never go into a situation where you don't have an opportunity. But the Art of War is to actually never go to war.
Well, as a Pierce County resident, though not your constituent, I would say I don't want them to have all the tools, even with the training. So no tanks in Tacoma, please.
Well, and so I don't know that a tank is the tool that they need.
Right.
So when I say they have the tools that they need, I mean, part of that tool is the training and the education. Having a taser is a tool that they need that is a less lethal option than a handgun. That being said, are there other less lethal options, less than lethal options? We need every opportunity that before they get to anything like a tank at all. I mean, that should be so far down a list and so far down our list of priority of funding that it's the best tool you can have is a relationship, out there in your communities. That's what we need to be funding. That's what we need to be focusing on.
Excellent. Thank you. And since we are at an hour, we can, I think we touched on most of the things that I wanted to touch on without having a stimulus from your questionnaire. because we usually like to review it for, can you tell us more about this answer, or, oh, this was, because it's curious or we don't agree, or because it was so awesome we wanted to hear more. And then we bring up other questions of the community if we have them. So we did at least get some of the questionnaire stuff and community questions done. And thank you for joining us. And
did you have some of the rapid fire ones? By me, or
okay, yeah.
I'll either give yes, no's, or succinct answers on those, and maybe that can help, because we've just been on like a handful of topics, and I know that what
that'd be great.
Yeah, Washington Coalition covers is so much more because it's a coalition.
So what we do is, so it's kind of a question of, do you think that this service, or it's mostly services, or a structure, should they be publicly funded or privately funded? And some of them are one of the questions is healthcare, and it's not that we want all healthcare providers to be government employees, but the funding comes from, we're advocating for a publicly funded healthcare, single payer, but it doesn't mean I want a doctor to be a government employee.
Right.
And so, but postal service, that is a government employee. So whereas, let's see, our buses, so I'm an advocate of taking our Pierce Transit public busing and making that a government agent. Like, this is just my crazy socialist.
It is a government agency.
But but
the board of directors is made up of elected officials that are appointed from the various jurisdictions, Tacoma, Pierce County, and a couple others. It's made up in the same method that the Tacoma Pierce County Board of Health is, that the South Sound 911 is, and they have their own taxing authority. So they're a junior government, just like Metro Parks Tacoma.
Okay, so that's the part that see. I want Metro Parks. I want their employees to be government. Are Metro Parks employees, the ones mowing the lawns, are they a government employee? Are they a union member?
Yes.
Okay.
Pierce Transit members, the bus drivers, are part of ATU.
Okay. So that was my lack of complete understanding.
Oh, okay. I was like, what do you?
So my examples are moot now. Moot. So it's like, do you think that this should either be a publicly funded service, continue to be a publicly funded service, or do you think there's room for privatization?
Okay.
Okay. So I'm still working on how best to introduce this list. It's unwieldy.
Let's just get rolling, and if I have any questions, I'll ask.
Okay. So healthcare.
Healthcare. I think that public funding can absolutely be a strong component of that. I think that there's room for healthcare coming from many different levels. In some cases, private. Bill Gates can pay for his own healthcare.
Okay. Postal service.
It should definitely be a government entity, but we need to fix the owner's requirement of overfunding the pension.
Absolutely. And I just hit a button and made my screen jump. Schools. Charter schools.
Paramount duty of the state of Washington is to fund our public school system. Public school system is the foundation of our democracy. A well-educated future is exactly what we need. Very much in favor of public schools. Okay. And my parents were school board members when I was young. It was a great little 2-room schoolhouse.
Oh, nice. How Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah. I grew up on a small farm in Nebraska. I've been in the land for many years.
But so charter schools, do you support them? Do they have a place?
Not that I've seen that works. I understand some people in our community, the anxiety that they have with our public schools and where our public schools have failed. I think that they offer a challenge, but I think what you've seen, what started out as a, look, we need another option, have led to in other cities around the nation, the jettisoning of the local public school option to a completely privatized system. So to that end, I think that they start out with good at providing options, but the end result actually tends to be much more corrosive and not the results that we're looking for. Okay. So not a fan of charter schools.
All right. Are there room for private prisons?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. Except
You know, that one of the paramount duties of the Pierce County is to run the jail system here locally. My only pause is that there's a prison or jail down in Nisqually that the Nisqually tribe runs, and I don't know if they consider that public or private, but it's in the Nisqually tribal jail. So to that end, it's public within their own government, but they lease out. They have contracts with other communities to help with overflow or some things like that. And so, in as much as but that comes from a governmental side. So I guess that. But as far as private prison, like when we think traditional private prison, no, I think that we've started down a dark path on private prisons. Incarceration should never be a profit motive. You should never have a profit motive to keep someone incarcerated. The duty of the state when it comes to incarceration should be rehabilitation and reintegration into society, not warehousing of individuals for money.
Excellent. And I want to I do want to revisit something about that at the end of this.
Is it around ICE?
No, but I mean,
we'll
did
touch on that in a bit. Continue through your list.
Okay. And then let's see, make sure I remember what, let's see, Social Security, like distribution and investment of Social Security.
I think the first thing we need to do is raise the cap on it and make sure that we're fully funding Social Security. And I think that it's a promise that's worked well and needs to continue to be funded. And we don't need to be rating it as a trust fund. But absolutely, that's been an essential part and needs to continue to be.
Okay. And then foster care?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't see how you privately fund that. You asking that makes me think that might be out there, which is kind of scary.
Oh, some people say like churches can do that.
No, there is private entities out there.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. I'm familiar with the more public entity of foster care. I went through some training on that some time ago. Here in Tacoma, we're actually working with Tacoma Housing Authority to do a development where every other house will be housing for foster care families and then senior housing in between them to create a village effect at raising these foster kids. So they both have kids who are also in the foster system, but also people who are within the community, so that not everyone in there is parent of foster kids, because that's a very intensive process for those families. And they need as much support that they can. So providing a good housing that has a community wraparound is something that we're actually working on. Just we'll be right here in East Tacoma.
Lovely. And excuse me, Bernie Sanders promotes universal child care. Do you support a publicly funded child care?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to, I think that's something, a very basic level that we can be providing. Again, I'm going to go back to, through my introduction, I didn't get a lot of it, but my day job is I'm community association manager in Salishan, the Hope 6 housing project in the east side of Tacoma, where we have about 1,100 homes, mixed income, from Section 8 voucher housing through senior housing to home ownership. And we're working on building what's going to be one of the Northwest's largest public daycares for residents of the east side. So they have a place for their kids so that they can pursue the education or work a day job without, it makes no sense to pay more in daycare than you're making in your day job. You know, there needs to be a opportunity to be able to seek that income or seek that education to get the higher income to support. So yeah, I mean, I think we can definitely look at bringing some models of that in.
Excellent. I heard that there's a 24-hour childcare facility now in Tacoma as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I've not heard of this, but send me some information on that.
Okay. Well, it was I came across it when my child was smaller, and so I don't know if it's persisted, but if I can find it, I'll send it. And then
I just about said your child's name out loud, and I was like, "Oh, you mean?" And I was like,
the risk of knowing your interviewer.
Yeah. But I held my tongue. So.
I wanted to say thank you though for actually being on that board. I have family that actually lives in that community, the Salishan community, and it's actually really nice. I've stayed there a few times, and the sense of community, it's actually there.
Yep.
And
well, that's my
there's
job.
Definitely some improvements.
Yeah, that's my job day in and day out. We just got 8 little libraries in here.
Oh, nice.
Actually put in, and we're hoping to get 2 more. And what that did is we then turned around that into a funded grant to start a Read to Me program to get that to encourage more people. And I'm going out and putting out bids, because what I want is, not just children's books. Of course, I want those. I want to put healthy eating cookbooks in all of our little libraries so that people are getting those in their houses. And then I want to seed them with books of multiple languages from all over the world. Because if you can imagine a kid opening it up, and Cambodian kid, and picking it up and seeing the Khmer language in a book. Maybe he doesn't fully understand it, but he knows grandma can read this. And he takes it home and presents it to her, and she reads to him in the Khmer language. How powerful of a bond that is, and what that says to people when they see books in a language that maybe they don't even speak, but they know the elders in their families do, or the elders finding the books in there, and what that says is a sense of welcomeness is something that we're going to be implementing in here.
That's beautiful. And and I also want, since we were talking about Shalashan, I want to mention that there's a food forest over there that's we don't get. Beacon Hill gets all the attention.
Yeah, but we have the cool food forest.
Yeah, we do.
Right in Swan Creek Park, and we're working on a permaculture center just to be hopefully as part of the redo of the Lister Highlands or Uplands, is that we can actually not only the food forest and what is actually one of the largest community gardens in the city, then the food forest, and then hopefully a permaculture site or function, I think would be great. And what we just need to do is make sure we do a good job of integrating the local community, making sure that they're learning from those things too. Just that we have a big festival coming up in the spring. Lisa Frashante's going to be putting on.
Oh, fantastic. And I love her.
Yes. Well, everything she does is amazing.
It is. And that explains why I see you at the parties.
Well, that wasn't me. That wasn't me at some of those parties.
If I was there, it's safe. Never mind. So then, okay. And in Tacoma, we have the wonderful public utilities. So on our list are utilities, including water and internet and cell service. Can you?
Well, water, power, all that, public utility, we need to expand that. Internet, I believe, needs to be a utility. That was something I would love to see Click turned into a local utility, and have fought to keep it as public as we can. And I think we need to provide low-cost broadband to every citizen. Cell service is kind of a new one, but it's kind of moved into that point where it's replacing phones, and I could see a utility option for cell phones. It would definitely be helpful in a community like the East Side. I haven't seen that model, but it's something that I'd be interested in learning more about.
Yeah, sometimes
something we could backbone through our utility, that's for sure.
Yeah. And I should have mentioned some of these are also like how much fantasy can you indulge in?
Well, and you know me, I like innovation. I'm willing to run things out there and see how much support it'll get. I'm the one who wants to put a flower on the Tacoma Dome. Andy Warhol's flower on the Tacoma Dome.
Yes, and I support that.
Far more controversial than you would realize. But I'm willing to get out there and host that conversation, because that's how sometimes really good things come out. Is that you get out there and you host a conversation about, should cell phones be a utility? And then what you end up with is you find out, well, no, but turns out we can offer everyone a free landline now at this point. So something, you get a different outcome, but that outcome itself can be pretty cool. I was having a conversation around how can we get more solar in the state? And I said, what the state needs to do in solar is, I think we have this asset called what's called WHOOPS, but the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. And so when you put in a solar field, there's 3 main costs. There's the solar itself, the land you put it on, and then getting the high capacity power transmission lines to the solar field. Now, I'm not intimately familiar with the Hanford site, but I do know they have a lot of land there that no one can really live on, but you could cover it in solar cells, and you could collect the rainwater that comes off of it, prevent it from going into the ground, pushing contaminated groundwater. The other thing you already have is high capacity transmission lines to that site. And you have a sunny year round. So it seems to me, if we wanted to do a large scale state solar project, it'd be in conjunction with our nuclear site and the lands that we can't use and tapping into already invested infrastructure across the state. Innovative things like that are something that I want to, keep raising conversation. Now, obviously, as a county council member, I'm not going to have a whole lot of insight on what we can do over there, but what can we do that locally? That's how I, came up against human trafficking or, some of our other various things. Is I just always bring this discussion of innovation to what we're doing. Sorry,
Excellent.
way off topic. On your rapid fire questions, I'm going way too slow.
Hey, sir, you said rapid fire. We're making notes.
I'm going.
Okay. Do you support a state bank?
Yes, I like what Hasegawa was working on Senator Hasegawa was working on last year. I think that some of that should come forward. I think in smaller population states like North Dakota, it works a little bit better. And I think it'd be a little more interesting in how we do it here locally. We just recently in Salishan opened up a Heritage Bank branch, which now, because we had a banking desert on the east side, I understand how impactful not being able to have banking resources can be to a community. And if it requires a state bank, particularly in some of our more rural areas, to get that level of service that a commercial bank doesn't see the dollars to invest in, it takes a state bank to serve those communities. And I think that's something we need to get behind. Hopefully it can be a mechanism for microloans, which are a great way to lift people out of poverty with a microloan system that's been very useful in Africa and some other areas. And I think we could implement it here.
And then would you, I'm going to combine a previous one, post office, and this one, banks. Would you support post offices offering basic banking services, check cashing, that kind of thing?
Well, they currently do money orders, right? So,
I'm not sure, but,
or they used to. So yeah, I mean, I think it would be a natural outlet when you're looking at if we did a state bank or a federal bank of some sort, that the post offices could be an asset to that. Also on the state bank, one of the problems that we run into with our local marijuana stores is their ability to do banking, because they're prevented from working with any bank that has interstate commerce. And so a state bank could allow safe deposits and actually credit card services and stuff. They've had to work with locally owned credit unions, but they're not always getting the best rate because of their constraint. A state bank could really help fund and provide safety for many of our local marijuana retailers and processors.
Okay. And then, so this is the transit question part of it. It's beyond buses. A public funded buses, ferries, railways, even airways. Would you support a public?
Oh, man, now Tacoma's going to really regret selling off that airport, because they own an airport. Actually, Pierce County does own an airfield. Actually, they sold it to the county. Now I'm thinking about it.
We can put one back in South
publicly
Tacoma.
owned airway would look like that. That's cool. Hey, we own an airfield. Pierce County does.
Yeah.
Talk to me more about that.
All right.
I'd love to know more, because we've already got an airfield. It's over in Gig Harbor, but we have an airfield that's underused. How could we connect that to Thunefield or Paynefield or some of these other local hops that could work?
I would hop down to Portland. I just need a sequence of small publicly owned airfields.
Not even publicly owned, just publicly accessed.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, we publicly own it. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Sweet.
Let's discuss it more offline.
Okay.
We've already taken way too much online.
Infrastructure. Maintain that as a publicly funded thing?
Yes, we need to continue to do that and actually invest far more in it than we are. At City of Tacoma, we actually put a ballot measure forward to increase residential street repairs and funding coming for that. And now we're seeing that come to fruition all over the city, and it needs to be continued and expanded.
Excellent. Military and its associated industrial complex.
Should be publicly owned and have public oversight.
Okay.
Should not be owned.
Okay. Blackwater kind of stuff. Yeah. And then the Veterans Administration, would you maintain that as a public, or because they're talk about privatizing that?
Well, I wouldn't privatize it, and I wouldn't maintain it where it's at, because it's underfunding what it is. So it should be far more robust in what it does in taking care of veterans, expanded to veterans and their families. I would like to see it actually service more than trying to find ways to service less.
Excellent. And then do you support publicly funding scientific research?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
In all fields.
And then space exploration, as in NASA, not Space Force. We've had to amend that question, just so you know.
Yeah, NASA, absolutely double their funding. You know, the value of information that we learn from space exploration about who we are as a little blue marble orbiting the sun is just incredibly useful. Space Force, yeah.
We're not even asking about that.
Good. Are we going to start arming?
Yeah.
You know, the way to stop a mass shooting in space is to arm all the astronauts. Isn't that the way that should work?
I think so. I think that's it. And then libraries. Should we be Tacoma's lost some libraries over the last few years.
Yes, my 8 little libraries should not begin to replace the ones that we've had to lose. We need to be both fully funding them and expanding them and looking as to, you know, what does the library of the future look like? Because how people receive and use their libraries has been changing, but we need to make sure that we're matching that, but that we continue to aggressively fund it.
Yes.
And in the last, I think 4 years in a row that I was on City Council, 4 or 6 years, we increased funding every year.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Community housing. Do you support public funded community housing, be it for people who are in a houseless situation or people who are aging out of their homes? They can no longer maintain them or physically enter or exit them.
Yes. I mean, it's my day job. But yeah, we also need to be able to give a place for people to age in place. So it's are we talking about, you know, reducing tax burdens on the elderly so they can remain in the houses that they're in? Or if there are public opportunities, we have a couple here in Salishan that, you know, with the KWA and the App House. And then we also are opening up here at 38th and Pacific. I think I mentioned it earlier, youth transitional housing to get crisis housing and to get people who are in housing crisis stabilized and then get them transitioned into getting the skills they need. There's 1,000 different ways you become homeless: medical bills, bankruptcy, co-occurring disorders. We need to make sure we're matching them with the pathway to get them out of homelessness. And many times that is, give me a place to stay for a little while and I'll get back on my feet.
And do you promote a housing first policy, or you have to jump hoops and then you get housing?
I think housing first. Put them in housing, then work with them on what their hoops are.
Okay.
Because a lot of times just that simple stabilization goes a long ways towards allowing us to properly assess what your issues are and then get you the help that you need. But the point is, we have to get this across the county. We can't keep saying Tacoma needs to carry all the burden. Puyallup, everywhere needs to be engaging, because homelessness, much like opioid, is not an urban. It's where it manifests itself. Mm-hmm. But many of these people lived in our suburbs. There are former soldiers. There are seniors from our communities. There are youth in our communities. How can we as a community say we don't want affordable housing? We're saying we don't want youth, we don't want seniors, and we don't want military. To me, that doesn't work. And we need to be broad-based across the entire county looking at approaching these issues.
Excellent. And we already talked about publicly funded elections. You were enthusiastic. Right now, I believe it's 75% of people who go before judges are unrepresented. They don't have legal representation. We underfund our public defenders as it is. So this question encompasses expansion, fully providing for our public defenders, but then the possibility, the dream of expanding legal services out further to even cover, say, divorce or other non-criminal aspects. Would you support that in a fantasy?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yes. My mind went to how I work it rather than do I support it. I'm thinking our Center for Dispute Resolution already helps avoid a lot of those costs and help actually people and entities stay out of the court system to where they can resolve that without it. But if you're in the court system, you should have access to legal services and advice. Absolutely. In the, when we talk about the accursed detention center we have in the Port of Tacoma, because they're being detained and it's not a criminal, but rather a civil, they're not afforded defense attorneys. And so while I was on the city of Tacoma, we stepped up and began the funding of a fund that, because of city of Tacoma dollars, we could only fund people from city of Tacoma who are in detention, but providing them with defense services, legal defense services for their cases if they need it, so that they can be properly represented in their case down there.
Excellent.
And I'm looking forward to, I think the council will probably be expanding upon that this next year.
That's great. I do love Tacoma. I really do.
A lot to love.
There is. I keep telling other friends who are quite socialist about some of the stuff we do, and they're like, what? Tacoma's awesome. I'm like, yeah, no shit. Oh, pardon me. Yeah, I have no filter. So then
This does not surprise me.
you know me.
Yes.
First responders, you want to keep them public?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
A little side note on that. What do you think about when police, and I think Tacoma doesn't have a lot of recent spotlights on it, thank goodness, at least that I've paid attention to. But if there were something untowards, if a police officer did something and suffered a punishment, and there was a fee to be given to the family or the person who was offended, shall we say? Sorry, wasn't prepared for this question.
Is it a question?
Yes, I'm coming to it. What about making, instead of those police fee, the fees of the court case coming from the city, can we, encourage them to better behavior by making it come out of their fund, like I don't know, the police union or the retirement.
Right, what you're trying to say there. I mean, I think our they are represented employees, and I don't think their union would support that, and understandably so, because we wouldn't want to defund hardworking officers' retirements because of something like that. That being said, they need to be held accountable for actions that they commit. I mean, it's and as I said, the best thing you can equip them with is education and training. And we need to continue to do that. We need to be continuing the best, the brightest to hire them, putting them in place and equipping them with education and training.
Okay. And there is only one thing left on the list, but we're going to talk, you already alluded that you're not a fan of ICE at the port. But my question was more about Pierce County has a disproportionate number of sexual predators due to the state releasing most of the people convicted of sex crimes to Pierce County because we have the resources in place. We have the infrastructure to help them. How are you going to more fairly balance that? I'm a big fan of taking, care of our responsibilities, but I don't want King County's or Callum County's responsibilities as well. How do we more protect ourselves?
Or other states.
Yeah.
Other states. When I was on city council, every time there was a registered sex offender put into my district, I would get a printout. The ones that normally go around to the local neighborhood, I'd get one for everyone. And I started a stack. Over 2 years, it got to be pretty heavy. And every time one would come in, I'd just put it on the stack. And then when some senators and representatives visited City Hall, I said, we need to do something about this housing. And I took and I dropped the stack on the table with a nice little thud and said, this is my district right here. And this is disproportionate. And here's my evidence that's sitting right now on the table that we have disproportionate. And so we need to continue to push at the state level. But what I'm doing is bringing evidence to that argument more than just a map with some dots, but physical there that this needs to be a statewide issue. Incarceration is not a community issue. It's a state issue. It's a duty of the state, and it's a duty of the state to find reasonable housing and accommodations for those who they've released and continuing their monitoring on. Just because we've stepped up in the past doesn't mean that we remain the future pathway for all things. What we should be is a model that others adopt, not exploit.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, and this is our biggest fantasy question. You might have heard of a universal basic income. That is not supported by very many people. And so this is one of those things that, how would we make it more appealing? What comes out of that idea? And so we've come up with the idea of a caregiver's basic income. If you care for a child under the age of 8, and I chose 8 because in Washington, you have to either enroll your child in school by that point or register them as homeschooled. So children under age 8, someone with disability, someone who's aging and elderly, if you're caregiving, you shouldn't have to balance a job or jobs and your other familial responsibilities. That you should, and it should also go to credit your Social Security, because at this point, if you take time off to caregive, you don't accrue Social Security.
My good friend Carly now runs her own caregiving company, or does her own caregiving. You know Carly, and who worked for me at the store for many years. And she runs her own caregiving, and we've talked about how hard it is for her to get by sometimes. And that's, she's taking care of seniors. I like the approach that you're taking, which is it's not just you get a universal income just for
existing.
Yeah, it is. You're helping others, and let's talk more about that. I like that. Let's sit down and kind of map out, how many is that? What's those numbers? How many, are currently eligible for that? Is it a tax credit, or is it a check that arrives? Is it? I'm interested to see how that would work, but it sounds like you've given it some good thought, and I like that. So let's frame that out.
Marilyn Chase.
It's a state level thing for sure. I
Yeah.
don't think it's anything that we can do on a city or county level, and so it's nothing I would see coming across my desk. But I'm happy to sit and just kind of talk that through and see who we can get before about maybe raising that some more.
And we've had we're talking to a lot of people running for state office, and we've talked to a couple of people who have who are already in state office, and we're getting some good responses. Nobody's said that this is a bad idea. It's all about, well, how do we make that happen? So
what you're saying is you like the incrementalism approach to it.
On this topic, sir. No, actually.
So we have our big wishes.
Yeah.
But many times it is stair steps, and what you do with stair steps is you create a proof of concept.
Yeah.
So what you're asking to do is create a very targeted pilot or proof of concept, and then from there, well, okay, we do caregivers. Now, well, okay, what about this? And then what about that? And that's how you get to your goal, is taking reasonable and approaches. I sit here and so I know we're wrapping up, so I'm going to, when I first got involved with the Democratic Party, they pretty much blocked me out. I was just a small business guy that hadn't been involved in politics. And so I responded to that by becoming a PCO and getting involved. Pretty soon they had me running the caucuses. And I caucused for Senator Sanders last time around, because what I heard from people was a lot of people said, look, we don't agree with everything he's saying. There's some stuff that's kind of out there, but we respect him. And it didn't matter what side of the spectrum they were on. Everyone showed respect for Senator Sanders. And to me, that's what you wanted in the White House. You didn't have to agree with every ideal. You had to know that some of it was just pushing, how far as a community can we go? But if all sides respected him, they could get there. And that's totally, we went 180 degrees on that the other direction. And that's what really attracted me with a lot of it, is anyone who has that much respect from every side can get his issues discussed. And just by simply getting the discussion, you get a lot further down the road than if you're never allowed to bring it to discussion. And I think that we're in a crux in the Democratic Party. For the longest time, it's been, we're a big tent party. We're a big tent party. How do we bring more people into the tent? Are we looking to make a 3-ring circus, or are we working to have a party that gets things done? And I go back to the Sun Tzu Art of War. We need to stop thinking maybe of being a big tent, but being a series of tents that, indivisible people, they're against the Trump, but you don't have to agree on every issue to be able to be part of the army that is pushing the similar issues forward and having the common ground. And maybe we need to stop thinking of ourselves as one big tent, but rather as an army of a lot of small tents that coexist and respect each other and respect our differences and support our common grounds. And I think that's where we're going to, sometimes incrementally and sometimes by large jumps, get things moved forward. And sometimes it's about playing defense. When I brought the policy to make Tacoma the first welcoming city on the West Coast, it was to advance our immigrants and refugees in our city. Now it's become the line of defense against national policies and has put us in the lead on defending our immigrants and refugees. But that wasn't, the initial wasn't set up to be a defensive. It was meant to be something to engage and raise immigrants across our entire community. So I think we need to just look at and respect and work with each other. And I think we can get some great things accomplished together. I'd love to have everyone's support.
Excellent, thank you. And so this has been a wonderful experience. Thank you, Marty.
Well, thank you.
Actually, before we
Thank you,
send out, there is a question in the Facebook land. So Marty was able to have a private conversation with the Stingray technology. I am just wondering, and forgive me if it's been addressed, I don't think it was, why he did not ask for more information than just a briefing before his yes vote.
Again, this was many years ago. I did get a pretty thorough explanation and an explanation of what I felt were the legal hurdles that would be put in place or that needed to be achieved before anything could get put in place. It was before us at the time. We all had the opportunity. In retrospect, I'd like us to go back and I think the city should review whether or not it still continues to be the right thing. At the time it was coming forward, if you did a Google search for Stingray, it didn't exist, and it was we'd had it for several years before the newspaper even did an article on it. And at the time it came forward, there wasn't a controversy around it, and didn't and the way it was being explained looked like something that was just they get a warrant and they implement it. Much like instead of knocking on a door, they're knocking on a piece of technology. I mean, again, years ago since I discussed it, whether or not has it been used the way it was promised, and is it something we should continue to use, is the conversation that needs to be happening now. As I say, the one thing I did is when I found out is I didn't try to say, oh no, I didn't, take responsibility that we discussed it. We moved it forward. Now let's take responsibility, put it back on the table, and rather than saying blame you, is this the right thing? That's the discussion we need to be having, because now that there's more facts globally around this, is it continue to be the right thing for our city?
Thank you. Okay, the questions out here are done. Thank you, Courtney.
Oh, thank you, everyone.
So we would like to offer you this moment to give you the spiel and a gentle reminder that your lack of questionnaire might be counted against you.
And understood. You can get more information about my campaign at electmartycampbell.com. Call me on my cell phone, 253-376-3774. Back it up if you need to catch that again. I'm running because I've been actively engaged in community efforts across our Pierce County since I came here at the age of 22 to open up a pair of small businesses. I took $50, invested it, opened it up, and pretty soon built that to a couple stores here in our community. That led me to be more community engaged through neighborhood councils, through Board of the Grand Cinema, just lots of community organizations. That led to me running for city council. Didn't win the first time I ran, came back, went door to door, talked with people, came back, ran the second time. And for 8 years, I've been serving the east side and south end of Tacoma. I'm now asking to expand that footprint to serve Pierce County, Midland, Parkland, Spanaway, Summit, Waller, Clover Creek, and Tacoma, and making sure that everyone's afforded the best opportunity and the best representation that they can. I would appreciate everyone's support. Most importantly, if you have any questions, as I've shown, I love to just kind of wonk out on some of these issues. Give me a call. I'm willing to talk through it from my perspective, what I've seen. Most importantly, hear your perspective, because we don't know what we don't know, and I'm always willing to lean in and learn on those things.
Thank you so very much. I want to thank everybody again for joining in and being a part of this. And Marty, thank you again for joining in and being open to talking with all of us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Marty. It was a pleasure.
Oh, certainly, certainly.
I'm gonna go ahead and end the live stream, but you can hold on for just a second. Thank you all.